Good evening. Tonight's episode concerns the most audacious origin story ever etched across a temple wall. A universe that begins not with a thunderclap, a choir, or a primordial Big Bang, but with the most private act of masturbation, elevated to cosmic policy. If this little midnight field trip teaches you something, please toss a subscribe if you haven't already done it. And tell me in the comments what part of the world you are from, so the rest of the world can wish you a good night's sleep. I hope you truly love the stories I share with you all here. Imagine a creation myth where the technical term might be handcrafted. No, not pottery. The Egyptians, calm, incense-scented, magnificently bureaucratic, looked at existence and said, essentially, yes, that tracks. The cosmos started as a solo project. Think big theology meets bathroom break. Think sacred metaphysics meets, let's call it a self-care culture. I will repeat that phrase, self-care. It's our running gag and also a job description. Because in a world of river gods, crocodile cults, and solar boats that commute the sky like an ancient Uber, but with more rats, the first mover did not outsource. He took initiative. He produced deliverables. He released the correct fluids. And from that managerial boldness, wind, rain, lineage, taxes, everything we love and fear about civilization, all of it emerges with unsettling clarity. This is not a family-friendly bedtime story, unless your family is a senate of priests with clipboards, a fondness for euphemism, and a very permissive HR department. Here is what we know. According to the Old Testament's interpretation, it went a little like this. At the moment of creation, Atum, the god of creation, said, quote, I alone am the creator. When I came into being, all life began to develop. When the Almighty speaks, all else comes to life. There were no heavens and no earth. There was no dry land, and there were no reptiles in the land. When I first began to create, when I alone was planning and designing many creatures, I had not sneezed Shu the wind. I had not spat Tefnut the rain. There was not a single living creature. I planned many living creatures. All were in my heart, and their children and their grandchildren. Then I copulated with my own fist. I masturbated with my own hand. I ejaculated into my own mouth. End quote. From that point, he sneezed out the aforementioned wind and spat out the semen in his mouth for the aforementioned rain. Everything else, land, oceans, Furby, flowed from there. Even if mostly allegory, Atum was a trendsetter. It's been written, though not necessarily proved, that the pharaoh would jerk off into the Nile as an homage to Atum and to stoke the river's fertility. And while the science behind such beliefs is dubious, this much is definitely true. In ancient Egypt, one of the world's most renowned civilizations, masturbating both befitted a king and served as an act of God. Let us set the scene. Picture the Nile Valley at night, a long ribbon of black water humming with frogs. Reed beds chitter with insects. The air is thick, warm like bread, fragrant with blue lotus, animal fat lamps, and yesterday's barley beer. Far upriver, the desert breathes heat like an open kiln. In Thebes and Memphis, limestone temples glow under moonwash. Columns rise like bundled papyrus, and on their faces, gods walk sideways in perfect profile, wearing crowns that look like the world's bravest hennin hats. Somewhere a cat yowls because cats have always had notes. Inside a sanctuary, a priest in linen, so starched it could defend itself, stands beside a statue swaddled in gold leaf. He breathes through his nose the way a person breathes when the air is spiced with myrrh and the solemn pressure of "don't mess this up," palm fiber brushes, unguents, a bowl of milk with the skin cooled over, a little plate of dates because even divinity appreciates a snack table. When he speaks, it is in the precise tone of a person who knows the gods hear everything and that the paperwork is eternal. He will open the sanctuary. He will awaken the statue. He will, if the ritual calls for it, remind the god of how the world began, as if the god could forget. But the recitation matters. Recitation oils the hinges of reality. The Egyptians grappled with chaos. Their term for the pre-creation state was the dark, endless water. None, by narrating order into being. You don't fix the void, you describe it out of existence. So they recited the moment when the primordial mound rose from the flood, and a lone creator issued the memo of memos and said, "I alone, I separated sky from earth. I sneezed wind, I spat rain." And yes, the line that turns every modern classroom into a spontaneous coughing fit. The creator copulated with his own hand. A self-contained miracle of cause and effect that would make later philosophers clutch their pearls and then carefully catalogue them. If you're imagining giggles behind papyrus fans, dial it back. For the Egyptians, this was not smirk and wink territory. Creation had textures, slick oil, the bloom of incense, the drag of linen, the sting of desert dust. It had temperatures, cool pre-dawn water, furnace noon, the nice polite heat inside a bread oven. It had sounds, creak of rope, slap of oar, cattle bellowing, priests chanting, and it had processes. Creation wasn't just inspiration, it was an operation. The technical term might be cosmic logistics. Let's walk the steps, because if there's one thing Egypt did better than anyone, aside from inventing a calendar and making eyeliner into a military-grade accessory, it was turning the ineffable into a daily routine with charmingly blunt stage directions. Step 1. A creator alone in the flood. No land, no roofs, no awkward parties where someone says, "So, what do you do?" And the answer is, exist. In priestly texts, we find the builder god Atum, often merged with Ra, often lounging at the top of the family tree like a grandfather who also invented the family, described as generating the first pair of gods. In many recensions, that pair is Shu, air, and Tefnut, moisture. How? Through the body's own creative toolkit. Not because the Egyptians were trying to shock future documentaries, because they were mapping like to like. The fluid of life makes life. This is a culture that could look at a sunrise and see the daily birth of a god, that could look at the flood and see the heartbeat of the land, that could look at a seed and say, obviously, this is a death and resurrection machine. Of course, the first spark rides a bodily metaphor. That's not crass, that's geometry. Step 2, the primeval exhale. Shu rides out on a sneeze, Tefnut on a spit. In a world without HEPA filters, this is delightfully practical. Breath is air, spittle is moisture, ergo, we have a sky and humidity. Somewhere a modern hygienist faints. Sacralized body functions become cosmological mechanics. The universe isn't distant, it's intimate. The distance between breath and wind, between saliva and rain, collapses to zero. The technical term might be micro to macro mapping, but to the average villager, it just means don't mock your own breath. The sky might hear you. Step 3, reenact to maintain. The Egyptians didn't worship history, they renewed it. Many temple rituals ran on one principle. If the first time was good, do it again every morning forever. Daily offerings to statues weren't symbolic snacks. They fed the god idea, which fed the city's luck, which fed the granaries, which fed, ideally, everyone. Some texts suggest that kings, embodying the creator, engaged in fertility rites to sustain the Nile. Reportedly is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, because our sources come with the usual biases. Priests wrote them. Priests loved rituals. Priests also loved reminding the king that his job included weird things at sunrise. But it is entirely within Egyptian logic to imagine a pharaoh performing a private rite on a festival day directed toward the river, while priests sang virescent hymns to creation. Don't picture scandal, picture sanctioned behavior. The God King reenacts the solo genesis not as a meme, but as maintenance. You like bread? Then respect the origin story. Step 4. Local specialization. In Heliopolis, Atum sits at the center, world from self, a literal self-starter. In Hermopolis, a mysterious Ogdoad, 8 primordial deities, swirl in amphibious gloom until a cosmic egg hatches the sun. In Memphis, Ptah speaks the world into being, craft elevated to thought, thought elevated to speech, speech elevated to granite. These aren't contradictions. They are orthogonal software packages for the same hardware. Egypt ran multiple creation accounts, the way your phone runs multiple weather apps. Choose the one that matches your vibe, but carry an umbrella. The Egyptians are the opposite of fundamentalist. They are fundamentally pluralist. You can hold breath, egg, word, and hand in the same mind without combusting. Because reality is big and daily life is complicated. And sometimes you need the egg story, and sometimes you need the hand. So why did it matter? A creation myth is the original constitution. It tells you who rules, how power flows, what counts as a crime, and why taxes are a sacrament. If the king is the living Horus, if the temple is the bank of cosmic credit, then every act of preservation, feeding statues, reciting dawn hymns, even the embarrassing ones, is national infrastructure. You're not just performing rites, you're spinning the gears that keep the river punctual and the barley tall. Priests understood this. They wrote this. The state was a network of rituals braided like reed mats, and the metaphor of self-generation gave the crown a tidy justification. If the world begins in solitude and springs from will, then the king, solitary on his dais, wielding will, mirrors the divine job description. He's responsible. He's also to blame. In a drought, his inbox is full. Economically, temples were storage units, factories, farms, bakeries, and HR departments for the gods. Festivals moved grain, beer, cattle, and gossip. The Opet festival in Thebes was part logistics parade, part religious roadshow, part drunken PTO. People lined the avenues, the god travelled, and offerings flowed like any giant civic event that converts belief into inventory. The cosmology of fluid creation justified the rivers of beer, wine, milk, and oil that sloshed through these holy circuits. Offerings weren't random, they echoed the fluids of life, nourishment in, prosperity out. The theological spreadsheet balances. Socially, sexuality got treated with that Egyptian cocktail of frankness and decorum. Nude forms abound in amulets and art, not pornographic so much as prophylactic. Fertility deities like Min stride with unconcealed enthusiasm, to remind you that crops come from virile forces and that modesty has its place, but not in the field when the barley needs encouragement. You're a farmer, you want clouds. You're a city baker. You want ovens that behave, and yeast that acts like a union steward in a good mood. So you honor the powers that make things rise. Bread, bellies, the Nile. The life force is one river with many tributaries. You don't giggle at the canal just because it's wet. Politically, the myth gave kings a pretext to be necessary. If creation must be renewed by reenactment, who has the authority to reenact? Not the tanner, not the fishmonger, unless the gods appointed him via dream and a surprising turn of events, but primarily the crown. The cosmic household needs a head of household. Rituals scale, they legitimate, they also absolve. If the ritual is correct, intention matters less. You can be a tyrant who performs the right festivals and still call yourself the keeper of order. Is that cynical? No, it's anthropology. The technical term might be ideological adhesive. Of course, the edges always fray. Welcome to the threefold silliness baked into mortal life. First, interpretive creativity. Texts survive in bits, brushed into clarity by later scholars who, like everyone, bring their own lunch to the archive. One version describes Atum as creating alone with his hand. Another politely references the hand as a separate goddess. Because if you're going to allegorize all the way. This is not a joke. It's a grammatical solution. Where there is action, there is actor. Where there is actor, there may be deity. The Egyptians love a personified tool. It's how you get goddesses of chapels and deities of hinges. Somewhere, this is purely hypothetical. There is a very dignified priest trying to keep a straight face while cataloguing the pantheon. And someone says, "Should we list the hand?" And he says, "Obviously, put her under H." The technical term might be system completion. Second, festival overachievers. Give any society a reason to pour beer and they will overshoot the mark. The feast of drunkenness. Theologia meets cake stand celebrated the pacification of a wrathful goddess with vats of drink. It's not chaos exactly. It's a controlled demolition of inhibition. The stated purpose is the restoration of balance, the staving off of cosmic rage by immersive hospitality. The practical term was Tuesday, and if you didn't participate, people had questions. Spiritual questions. HR for the gods questions. Why aren't you spiritually elevated, Neberman? Are you against the maintenance of the universe? The callback is that creation began as a self-starter project and continues as a group project where everyone's breath smells like dates. Third, the souvenir problem. Egypt's image flows down history like a perfume spill, gorgeous, sticky, full of misunderstandings. Later readers smuggled in their own sensibilities, some translated with blushes, some translated with smirks, some treated the whole corpus as naughty jokes. But the ritualists were not giggling. They understood that the body is a library. If the lungs recall the sky, if the spit recalls the flood, if the hand remembers the first motion, then the liturgy is not about embarrassment, it's about precision. The line between sacred and silly is thinner than papyrus, and just as durable when you dry it right. Let's go slower, into the hum of a temple at dawn. The door bolts slide with a sound like a slow drum. The precinct smells of crushed herbs, animal grease, and stone dust. You can feel the temperature shift between courtyard and inner room. The sanctuary keeps the desert out, holds a cool like a cellar. The statue, freshly awakened, receives clothing, linen pleats precise as sunbeams. On the lips of a god carved with the sober slight smile the Egyptians mastered. A priest touches ointment with a reed, because food must be tasted through a consecrated gesture. Everything is tactile. The divine isn't far off. He's right here, swaddled, anointed, perfumed, fed. And when the hymns trace creation, they cross that line, hand to cosmos, without apology. Some versions of the creation hymn read like field notes from a metaphysical workshop. I was alone. I planned. I thought. I desired. I made. Desire is not scandal. Desire is an engine. The Egyptians treat it as a world builder, like hunger, like thirst. You crave bread. You bake civilization. You crave order. You write law. You crave a cosmos. You become the first project manager. Now picture the king on a festival day. Not necessarily every day. Kings are busy, and there are a lot of festivals. Egypt runs on holidays like a modern office runs on shared calendars, performing a gesture toward the Nile that replicates the start of things. Scholars suggest, sources hint, reliefs nod. The act is private, priest-directed, more theology than salacious rumor. The hope is simple. Let the river rise on schedule. The stakes? Everything. If the flood comes high and kind, the fields sing. If it sulks low or rages high, famine or ruin. Here is where belief meets economy. A ritual can't change rainfall patterns, but it can coordinate labor, soothe panic, and pay the temple staff. The cosmos runs on morale as much as math. Elsewhere, on a different feast day, women shake Manat necklaces, heavy strings of beads that click against the collarbone like the sound of rain on jars, and sing to Hathor, goddess of love and music and the well-timed hangover. Drums thump, perfume thickens, laughter peels off the stone. A young scribe, very certain of his immortality, blinks back a tear because the hymn hits just right, and he's had only 6 cups of festival beer, and he's on cup 7. The world is full of ordinary holiness. The slap of sandals, the slap of clay, the slap of fish hitting a basket. You keep going because the ritual says keep going. That's the glue. Let's look at some case studies. Gods of emphasis. Atum, the self-care god. Horus, the avenger, and the falcon with a glare like a north wind. Hathor, patron of music, cows, and the beauty industry. Min, that unabashed embodiment of fertility who stood tall in shrines, reminding everyone what growth looks like. Rendered both literally and symbolically, because some messages need to be legible from a distance. Isis, magician of family retention. Ptah, craft and word fused into one blueprint. The pantheon is a mood board of human needs. You need wind, air god. You need rain, moisture goddess. You need the social contract of bread and beer. Household deities with charming resumes. You need to explain why the river shows up every year like a punctual uncle with presents. A creation story that handles fluids like accountants handle columns. The humor for us is the juxtaposition. They made the private public. But for them, the cosmos wasn't polite, it was immediate. The human body is not an embarrassment, it is a microcosm. To ignore it in theology would be malpractice. Perhaps that's the most radical, sensible thing in the Egyptian imagination. You honor reality by refusing to redact it. The scribe's footnote, because someone will ask. Did they really believe the pharaoh, you know? Did the thing into the Nile? The historian in the late night slot straightens his tie, sips a room temperature beverage and says, "We have suggestive statements and a logic that allows it." We also have the pulse of a civilization that constantly reenacted creation. So is it plausible? Yes. Is it recorded with the ghastly detail that later gossip wants? Not quite. Rituals breathe in the margins. Private, priestly, the kind of thing whispered rather than shouted. The Nile rises for meteorology's reasons. But the ritual's value is in participation. When you invest the river with story, you recruit the entire city to cooperate with nature. You generate a feedback loop between belief and behavior, which, according to every temple economist, is the whole point. There are three things the myth does better than we do. It integrates the body with the cosmos. Moderns compartmentalize. Physics over here, feelings over there. A harried yoga class in the middle. The Egyptians stack it. Breath is wind, saliva is rain, desire is creation. It is all one ladder. You may scoff, but their calendar kept the barley on time for millennia. It assigns maintenance. A lot of creation myths are one and done. Some god throws a mountain at a serpent, and we all go home. Egypt says, every day is day one. Make the offerings, open the doors, stir the pots, fix the crown. Creation is a job. It excuses festivals. We drink, says the hymn, because the goddess once almost killed everything and then calmed down with a beverage. It's theology as harm reduction. You don't solve rage, you host it kindly. You schedule your meltdown on the liturgical calendar and put out extra water jugs. Let's talk about the smell of order. We rarely talk about scent, but Egypt hums with it. Blue lotus, likely mildly psychoactive, floats in cups. Kai-fi, incense, resin, wine, honey, raisins, burns in censers. A perfume that smells like a spice market went to finishing school. Sweat stains linen while fans flick air. The river smells like wet clay and fish oil. The desert smells like sun on stone. The temple smells like every substance that pretends to be forever. Egyptian time is tactile. That's why their gods have textures. The gold skin of Ra, the feathers of Ma'at, the quicksilver tongue of Thoth. When you render the origin as a bodily act, you're anchoring eternity in something the senses can hold. It's pedagogy by proximity. The counterpoint chorus. Now, somewhere in the back, a chorus of later ages clears its collective throat. This is obscene, says one tradition. This is symbolic, says another. This is an allegory for royal power, says the scholar in a jacket that crinkles when he moves. All can be true. Religions are Russian dolls. Literal inside, symbolic inside, political inside, economic inside a snack. Egyptians weren't naive. They knew what they were doing. When they penned lines about sneeze and spit and hand, they weren't writing smut. They were constructing a mnemonic. You can remember a sneeze. You can imagine a spit. You can see a hand. Try remembering an abstract, unmoved mover when your kid has a fever and the flood is late. The Egyptians kept their gods useful. The museum problem. Walk into any museum and you will find Egypt arranged like it's tidied its room. Statues behave. Sarcophagi pose. There's a clean glass distance that muffles the human thunder. Our job tonight is to rub a little sand back into the hinges. To recall that people slept hot, woke early, and did not have coffee. That they drew calendars in starlight and taxes in blue ink made from ground copper. That their boats were miraculous and their beer was nutritious and their bread could chip a tooth if left out. That their priests wore cones of perfumed fat that melted down the wig during long ceremonies, anointing the shoulder in slow drips that smelled like a candy shop from heaven. That a myth about a self-starting god wasn't the punchline, it was the pitch. Do your part. The cosmos begins in solitude and ends in community. Humor in the footnotes, subtle, but there. When the texts personify the creator's hand as a goddess, sometimes even as the eye, which departs and must be coaxed home with music and drink, we witness a culture that refuses to be caught by shame. It sublimes the awkward into the divine. It's the opposite of prudery. It's pragmatic mysticism. Picture a table of scholars trying to translate. Do we say hand, or do we say creative principle? Or do we draw a tasteful veil and gesture vaguely? We do all three, and then we raid the pastry tray because philology is exhausting. The HR for the gods. Remember our ancient HR department? It's busy. It files grievances when kings skip festivals. It updates the handbook to note that the Feast of Drunkenness is not permission for employees to visit crocodile pools. It schedules safety briefings about torch etiquette. And it keeps one laminated page at the very front, Cosmic Policy 1, stating that the universe began as a self-starter initiative. The lesson is not that everyone should imitate the primeval act on casual Fridays. The lesson is that initiative feeds order. If you don't participate, people have questions, spiritual questions, yes, but also irrigation questions, storage questions, and why is the bakery closed? Questions. In a land where a failed flood can erase a generation, participation is morality. A stroll through the boroughs of belief. Let's walk city to city, myth to myth, and watch the motif adjust its tie. Heliopolis, the sun cult. Atum on a mound, weary and satisfied, brings forth the first pair. The horizon is an arc of bronze every morning. The priests here are narrative engineers with a love of genealogies. God A begets God B and C, who produce D through H, who staff the offices of the sky. The creation by self is not raunch. It's the headwaters of a river of names that leads to you, barefoot on your mud brick roof, counting stars to time the irrigation turn. Hermopolis, the Ogdoad bubble and croak, male and female pairs of darkness, water, infinity, hiddenness. Out of their amphibian conference emerges an egg, or a lotus. The lotus opens, the sun rises, existence yawns and stretches. Do we still see the original self-starter motif? Yes, in the sense that creation doesn't need two. One pattern births another. The Egyptians liked redundancy. More myths, more coverage. If the egg fails, try the lotus. If the lotus fails, sneeze the wind. Redundancy is resilience. Memphis, Ptah crafts with heart and tongue. The world is spoken, as a carpenter speaks a plan, and his hands follow. The body is still the engine, now as mind and mouth instead of hand. We're not abandoning the original story, we're rotating it. Egyptians adore correspondences. Mental speech is to physical work, as divine word is to cosmic shape. And none of this cancels the dawn opening ritual where the statue's lips taste bread and beer like a contract signed daily. Domestic reality check. And what of the average house? Mud brick, 1 or 2 rooms, roof for sleeping on hot nights, courtyard for grinding grain. A domestic shrine with a rudimentary stela, and perhaps a bez amulet for protection. Comically squat, tongue out, a bugbear turned guardian. In this house, sexuality is not scandalous. It's a schedule. Births spaced by resource, nursing long because formula does not exist. Tender gestures between spouses depicted on scraps of ostraca with surprising sweetness. The violence of life, disease, toothache, scorpion stings. Dances beside the affection on every wall relief, where a mother holds a child with a grip that modern parents recognize instantly. Inside this reality, a creation myth that values the body isn't obscene. It's comforting. The body matters because it is the only place we live. The king as weather app. The pharaoh's body is public instrument, legal fiction, political theatre, and weather app. When he's healthy, the empire's fine. When he coughs, the gods notice. He wears crowns that signal jurisdiction, like little flags for the sky and soil. When he appears in relief smiting foreigners, we roll our eyes at propaganda. When he pours water over mummy wrappings, we see the softer statecraft of care. And when a ritual suggests he reenacts the solitary beginning by dedicating seed to the river, the act is not voyeurism, it's an index. The king aligns with the primordial pattern. May the flood align with the fields. It is a wish you can film in limestone. 3 rule of 3 lists. Because I promised. 3 anachronistic comparisons. Creation myth as startup pitch. I alone, MVP in hand, shipping V1. 0 by dawn. Temple liturgy as compliance training. Welcome to Sekhmet mitigation. 101 hydration, music, and how to file a being eaten by lioness exception. Festival calendar as HR portal. Submit PTO for OPET under otherworldly logistics. Attach crocodile waiver. 3 sensory snapshots. The rasp of a reed pen on limestone. The grain catches like sand in the teeth of a seashell. The taste of diluted beer at noon. Sour, bready, weirdly nutritious. Your belly relaxes. Your tongue admits defeat. The weight of a minute necklace, thudding rhythm on clavicle bone. Beads warmed by body heat. 3 deadpan clarifiers. Self-starting deity is not a performance note. It's a cosmological credential. Spitter's rain is not meteorology. It's metaphoric hydraulics. Sneeze as wind is not contagious. It's connective. The classroom whisper. Whenever this topic slinks into modern classrooms, you can hear desks shift. There's the adolescent chuckle, the adult smirk, the careful throat clearing of someone who hopes the world still contains mysteries, but also schedules. And then there's the slow dawning that the Egyptians are not being childish. We are being skittish. They're comfortable with origin in the literal. We want origin in the metaphorical. They build with clay, we build with abstractions. But both cities need bridges. Egypt builds one you can walk across barefoot at dawn with a jar on your head while the mist lifts off the canal. You feel the world begin because your lungs fill and empty, and everything you do is a miniature tide. The scholar's hedge, because factuality matters. A sober note, delivered in that mock official tone. Sources differ, and we live with that happily. Not every line in every hymn agrees with every colleague. Scholars suggest is not code for we're making it up. It's code for the archive is large, the river moved, papyrus rots. An ancient people wrote with as much variety as modern people tweet. We triangulate. We weigh the plausibility based on cultural logic and comparative texts. The motif of self-generation is robust across Egypt's theological centers. The exact ritual behaviors of kings, reported in hints, supported by the logic of reenactment, but not documented with GoPro footage. That's fine. We don't need CCTV to understand the mind of a culture that built eternity 3 times before breakfast. The payoff. So, after all our incense and footnotes and practical magic, what have we built? A universe that is not a distant explosion, but a near gesture. A cosmos that prefers verbs to nouns. A state that turned maintenance into holiness. And a population that woke each day into a world where the first hero act was not stabbing a serpent, but taking initiative. The running gag returns, not as a laugh, but as a mantra. Be a self-starter. The gods started themselves. The river starts the field. The baker starts the loaf. The mother starts the day. The priest starts the hymn. Everyone's doing their part. If you didn't participate, people had questions, spiritual questions, HR for the gods questions, and irrigation questions, always irrigation questions. One last visual, pre-dawn blue, a rim of sun squeezing up, fields dark and waiting. Somewhere in the city, a temple door opens with a sigh. The statue's lips glisten with oil. The priest's voice folds the first story back into the morning like a baker punching down dough. Farther off, the river swells, patient and confident, because that's what rivers do when mountains sweat and snow remembers to melt. Do the rites cause the flood? Meteorology shrugs, but the rites cause the city to move in unison, and that's a different kind of causality, the kind that builds granaries. You cannot irrigate with metaphysics. You irrigate with people. Myth coordinates them. Egypt understood that profoundly. So, if the modern Big Bang is a silent flare in a vacuum, Egypt's beginning is a close whisper in a candle-lit room, tactile, direct, a world started by a god who did not wait for permission. Maybe that's the lesson smuggled beneath all the lotus and gold. The universe we get is the one we keep making, bravely, daily, by hand. In our second story tonight, we will journey through the life of Queen Elizabeth I, the last and longest reigning monarch of the House of Tudor. Let's begin with, the smell. Not incense, not roses, not the dreamy aroma of a Netflix biopic, but hot tallow, damp wool, and the iron tang of a London that's basically a Renaissance slow cooker. He will not say it aloud because he is being mock scholarly and it is after midnight, but the technical term for that aroma might be national ambience. Within this steam bath, a red-haired survivor grows up to be a brand, a border policy, a demolition derby of suitors, and, minor detail, the Queen. Elizabeth Tudor, a monarch who weaponized rumor, composed policy like a madrigal, turned virginity into a standing army, and invented, if not the modern PR cycle, then at least the Tudor version of please like and subscribe. This is the life of Queen Elizabeth I, a woman who learned early that the surest path to survival was to stand perfectly still while everyone else set themselves on fire. Think crisis management, but with more decapitations and fewer slide decks. Then, how does a woman born the scandalous byproduct of a royal midlife crisis, illegitimate, inconvenient, and occasionally imprisoned, become the sovereign who outlives her enemies, flirts nations into submission, and makes celibacy look like a NATO treaty? Imagine choosing between two internships. One labeled, marry a European power broker and be annexed emotionally. The other, be a walking symbol until your hair is a foreign policy. She chose symbol. Our running gag begins here and will haunt every minute like a court jester who won't take a hint. Elizabeth's virginity isn't a personal choice. It's a line item in the national budget. The Treasury will approve it. Parliament will debate it. Diplomats will submit expense reports against it. We return to this shortly, frequently, and with relish. Let's set the scene. His year is 1,533 inches Greenwich Palace, and a nation oscillating between Catholicism and whatever Henry VIII woke up believing that morning. Temperature, clammy, soundtrack, bells, boots, and an infant with a future so uncertain that her cradle might as well be a roulette wheel. Elizabeth is born to Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom Henry torched the old order, only to get bored, as men with unchecked power and a limited attention span famously do. 3 years later, the sound you hear is a door closing forever. Anne is dead, declared a liar, a witch, a calamity in a French hood. Elizabeth goes from princess to lady with a quill stroke, Learning Lesson 1 in Tudor School. Status is just a rumour with a uniform. Texture, the scratch of demotion on fine parchment. Temperature, colder. Her childhood is a survival practicum. Tutors shovel Greek and Latin into her like coal into a furnace, because knowledge is quiet armour. She grows fluent in languages, politics, and the subtle art of not dying. She reads Cicero, plays the virginals foreshadowing, thank you, and learns that the floor beneath every woman in power sits over a trapdoor. She acquires the useful habit of stillness, watching men explain themselves into smaller rooms. Think board meeting where the actual CEO never speaks. She just tilts her head and the numbers confess. Enter religion, the Tudor version of an operating system with too many forced updates. First, the Catholic app is deleted by her father. Then the Protestant patch is installed by her half-brother Edward VI, a zealot in a child's body. Then Mary I arrives with the old faith and a hot brand, proving that sisterly love is best expressed through arson and legislation. Elizabeth understands the new ritual. Align your conscience with the weather report. Scholar's term, prudential flexibility. Practical term, keeping your head. During Mary's reign, Elizabeth is the human embodiment of a ledger balanced at zero. She conforms just enough, prays privately with plausible deniability, and stays allergic to headlines. She is arrested, of course. What is a Tudor childhood without a little tower tourism? The tower is cold, more stone than hope, and every footfall echoes like an accusation. She knows intimately and forever that the walls of power are porous and the floor can open. She also learns the acoustics of fear and how to tune them until they sing obedience. Mechanism of her survival. Step 1. Disclaim ambition. Step 2. Claim piety. Step 3. Wait for other people's plans to dismantle themselves. If Mary suspects her, Elizabeth kneels. If counsellors bait her, Elizabeth smiles. If spies report on her, Elizabeth compliments their penmanship. She's turning her life into performance art, and the title of the piece is Woman Not Doing Anything Suspicious, Please Continue. Remember our running gag, the virginity budget line. It's coming. For now, chastity is merely the ankle bracelet on the prison of suspicion. 1558. The crown lands on her head like a halo with spikes. It's a grey November. Breath fogs the air at Hatfield, where she emerges under a great oak, or, at least, under a great myth, and recites a psalm because even propaganda needs a soundtrack. The coronation's texture is velvet, fur, gold leaf so thin you can sense its fear of being touched. The smells, smoked meat, horses, spilled ale, statecraft via picnic. The city, allegedly, loves her. Londoners are always game for a parade, especially one that promises fewer bonfires with humans on them. The technical term for this mutual comprehension might be political dopamine. Everyone gets a hit. Elizabeth inherits a triple mess: religious chaos, anxious coffers, and foreign wolves with napkins tucked under their chins. Her team, Cecil, Bacon, a flurry of lean, ink-stained functionaries, drafts a new settlement. It is both a theological statement and a customer service policy. England shall be Protestant, but not rude about it. The Book of Common Prayer returns with softened corners. Priests marry quietly, bishops wear something less shiny, and the incense budget is regrettably cut. Catholics are to be tolerated until they aren't. The altar is replaced by a communion table. To the untrained eye, a matter of carpentry. To the trained eye, an act of war. Elizabeth calls herself supreme governor, not head, because mock officially speaking, the Almighty retains the corner office. This is the Elizabethan religious settlement, not a blaze of certitude, but a calibrated hum, like a fan you forget is on until someone turns it off. To the devout on both edges, it's either too much or too little. To the center, it's Tuesday. To her, it's survival. Now cue the suitors, a montage that would, in lesser hands, be a dating show, but here becomes foreign policy with ring sizes. Philip II of Spain hovers, part moth, part thundercloud. The Austrian Habsburgs wave politely from behind their chins. The French Valois brothers promise poetry, tuberculosis, and an army. Inside England, Robert Dudley, our tall glass of charismatic mischief, glides into frame with cheekbones you could launch a fleet upon. Gossip attaches to Dudley the way smoke attaches to a candle. Inevitable, flattering, dangerous. His wife, Amy Robsart, then becomes dead at the bottom of a staircase, and rumour adjustments are made. The technical term for this, in the Academy of Late-Night Historians, is catastrophe with fringe benefits. Elizabeth keeps Dudley close enough to weaponize, but far enough to deny. She refuses marriage because every single wedding vow is also a treaty. Not to a man, to an empire. Here the running gag prints its first budget report. Elizabeth's virginity is now the Crown's sovereign wealth fund. She spends it by never spending it. Each year she does not marry yields interest. Spain hopes, France hopes, domestic lords hope. Hope is leverage. She flirts with the calculus of nations. Her portraits evolve into a multi-sensory ad campaign. In one, she holds a sieve. Purity is practical. I am the filter through which all foolishness must pass. In another, she stands before rainbows and serpents and pillars and globes, and enough symbolism to immobilize an art historian. The rainbow portrait shows eyes and ears stitched into her dress. E. She is omniscient and has a tailor with an anxiety disorder. The Armada portrait floats her between columnar rhetoric and cartographic flex, a hand upon the globe as if groping destiny. Elizabeth becomes Gloriana, Astrea, Virgin Mother of the State, and a walking courtroom where the case of England v. Oblivion is argued daily. She's Michelangelo's David as a PR strategy. Let's address the sex, the fetishes, the affairs, the scandals, always PG-13. But we are not saints here. Court is an oxygen-poor altitude where attention substitutes for oxygen. Young men with ambition discover that a queen's smile is a kind of payroll. The favourites, Dudley, later the Earl of Leicester, the Earl of Essex, with his dangerous eyelashes, compete in a tournament where the trophy is proximity. The currency is touch, a gloved hand given, a ring slipped, a dance in which the rules are rhythm and reconnaissance. The fetish is power dressed as romance. Elizabeth's own fetish, if we're honest, is control. She wants to be adored like a goddess by men who cannot touch the altar. She allows the rumour that she is part marble, part flame. The body politic becomes the only body anyone can safely claim. Scholars suggest she encouraged masks precisely because everyone wears a mask and the hierarchy of satin keeps the peace. But nowhere does she control the narrative more flamboyantly than in the theatre of marriage proposals. Each emissary arrives with a velvet box and a dossier of contingencies. Each prince is assessed like a warhorse: bloodline, stamina, previous owners. The queen hears, smiles, postpones. She frames delay as wisdom, chastity as patriotism, and her unmarried state as an English fortress. Ask again next year. Ask again because you must. One could argue she invents the concept of "it's not you, it's geopolitics." Our running gag: budgetary prudence mandates virginity. Parliament would like to audit the accounts. The Queen assures them the fund is performing well. Dividends include peace treaties, favourable trade terms, and a national mood best summarised as, "We're fine as long as she keeps not doing that." On the messy front, let's tour the absurdities. Rule of 3. A Scottish cousin named Mary, who is simultaneously kin, cocktail party conversation, and existential crisis. An island state deciding it's a continental power, and a court where aging is a public spectacle, and makeup is a weapon. Mary, Queen of Scots, is Elizabeth's mirror in a funhouse. Younger, Catholic, wedding-happy, and spectacularly bad at career planning. Elizabeth neither hugs nor beheads her at first. She keeps Mary in a series of scenic prisons, a policy that is equal parts mercy, menace, and interior decorating. The nation watches their queen perform the world's longest sigh. Should she kill a crowned queen? Is regicide contagious? Will Europe send a casserole or an army? The technical term for Elizabeth's hesitation might be constitutional dread. The practical term is waiting for Mary to forge her own gallows with pen pals. Mary obliges. Enter the Babington plot, teenaged conspiring with a side of encryption. Letters are smuggled in beer barrels, craft espionage before craft beer was cool. The codebreakers of Walsingham, Elizabeth's spy master, perform a ballet of paper cuts and triumph. Mary is tried with due theatricality. The sentence is inevitable. When the axe falls in 1587, England becomes a place where queens can be killed legally, which is both clarifying and horrifying. Elizabeth takes the news as if a nation had demanded her private soul as tax. She claims the warrant was signed by accident, tears a performance, and punishes the messenger. It is grief, or strategy, or both. The echo of it will haunt her in insomnia and liturgy. Now Spain, Philip II, offended by Protestant cheek and English piracy, builds an Armada, a floating sermon in oak. England responds with weather, fireships, and prayer formatted by logistics. The smell is pitch, salt, sweat, the sound a drumline of cannons and the whisper of wind that becomes a theology. Elizabeth rides to Tilbury in armour, not full plate, mind you, but enough to send a signal. She delivers a line that PR teams 3 centuries later will quote in PowerPoints through tears. "I have the heart and stomach of a king." The mixed metaphor of monarchy and digestion is beside the point. The troops cheer because rhetoric tastes like victory when you're underpaid and damp. The Armada breaks upon storm and seamanship, and England discovers the pleasure of being small and loud and glorious on Tuesdays. A coin is minted, a myth is minted. The Queen invests the dividend in more portraits. What about domestic life? Imagine living through a fashion trend in which lead makes you gorgeous. The face of Gloriana becomes a canvas. Egg white, vinegar, cerisa, a frosting of toxins you would not recommend to friends. The texture is chalk, the smell, faintly of metal and willpower. Under the paint, the human body betrays her. Smallpox scars are concealed by theatre. Teeth totter like old pillars. Wigs riot like coral reefs. She spends hours each day being assembled into an archetype. The courtiers wait and age and rehearse compliments. The ritual works because it is shared. They conspire in pretending she is timeless because the state requires it. The technical term might be mutual delusion for profit. The practical term is court. How about scandals and grudges? Her cousin Mary is dead, but Mary's son, James VI of Scotland, is alive and collecting IOUs in Presbyterian silence. Catholic plots erupt and are extinguished. Jesuit missionaries sneak into England, disguised as gentlemen tutors, roving PhDs with a sideline in treason. Torture is conducted in unimpeachable basements, where the smell is wet rope and the sound is argument applied to anatomy. Elizabeth signs death warrants, with a hand that trembles more from the weight of habit than moral panic. She bans outright heresy and writes letters that fold like daggers. She grudges with style. Against the proud old houses of England, Norfolk, Northumberland, who presume marriage is a ladder she must climb to reach their importance. Against Parliament, which will not shut up about succession. Against time, which turns her favourites into suits of wrinkled silk. She flirts with the Earl of Essex until the flirt becomes stupid. He is brilliant, theatrical, and allergic to paying attention. He returns from Ireland without permission, then storms the Queen with men and bad timing. His rebellion is a tragicomedy, roadblocks in the wrong places, allies with last-minute headaches. Elizabeth makes an example of him. Trial, execution, a warning that the Queen's smile is not an alibi. Later, she keeps his ring or doesn't. Historians bicker, let them, and weeps decorously. Revenge in her hands is due process with jewelry. And what of culture? She rules a stage as crowded as London's inns. Theatres multiply like gossip. The theatre, the curtain, the rose, the globe. Playwrights feed an audience drunk on metaphor and reasonably priced oranges. Shakespeare writes histories that gently caress the monarchy's ego. Spencer dedicates the fairy queen, wrapping her in allegory until she glows. Music pours from chapels, astronauts of harmony exploring a universe that doesn't require boats. Explorers, speaking of boats, go places. Drake circumnavigates the world to prove it exists. They return with maps, spices, and novel diseases. Roanoke vanishes in an early demonstration of England's imperial project management. Tobacco arrives, a mood with smoke. Fashion escalates to roughs so large you need an attendant to reverse a hallway. The Queen watches it all with the interested detachment of someone who is both muse and manager. Why it mattered? Because nations are stories, and hers was a bestseller. She stabilized a country that had tried on 5 regimes in 25 years and made it look like continuity. She balanced books, faiths, and egos. She calcified the idea that England could be modern by being ancient Roman in ambition, chivalric in branding, Protestant in paperwork. Economically, she was neither revolutionary nor negligent. She was thrifty. War is expensive. Propaganda is cheaper. She understood the utility of pageants, progresses, and well-fed gossip. She toured the kingdom, slept in other people's beds, ate their food, and sent the bill. The technical term, royal progress. The practical term, touring queen meets Airbnb. Now the private interior. As far as we're allowed to peek without becoming the very kind of courtier she trained us to distrust. She loved fine clothes, small dogs, big ideas. She danced well past what critics would call a sensible retirement, because rhythm is sovereignty made flesh. She spoke languages for pleasure and diplomacy for sport. She measured out affection like a pharmacist, careful, exact, aware of side effects. She could be cruel because monarchy always is. She could be kind because she enjoyed the contrast. And sexually, we don't know, which is the point. The archive is a rumour mill with footnotes. Reportedly, the Queen permitted liberties within precision. Knees, eyes, hands, the ancient triad of the almost. Perhaps she was a virgin. Perhaps she was strategically undefined. Chastity became a fetish object for a nation. If she let a favorite kiss her hand too long, the treasury exchanged glances with foreign affairs. If she scolded a court lady for marrying without permission, it was not jealousy, but HR for the gods. Do not marry without the CEO's approval is the policy. The technical term, sanctioned behavior, will be enumerated after Vespers. Let's sketch 3 edge cases for the rule of 3, because comedy and scholarship like symmetry. 1. The hanging gardens of her temper. Courtiers record thunderclaps, rages as orchestrated as masks, time to underwrite authority. She throws a slipper the way a general throws a battalion. 2. The miniature heartbreak of aging in public. Her face becomes a treaty between cosmetics and time. The mirror, a hostile witness. She orders all unflattering portraits destroyed, the Renaissance version of curating your grid. 3. The succession question, that national hobby. She refuses to name an heir, as if words could conjure mortality. The court whispers, James, James, James. She pretends the topic is rude. She is not wrong. The moment you announce your replacement, you begin rehearsing your exit. Late rain. The room is cooler even in summer because absence lowers the temperature. Dudley dies. She writes his last letter on his letter and keeps it near her heart, within the archive of herself. Walsingham dies. The air grows riskier. Cecil dies. The desk sighs. Her inner circle becomes a circle of ghosts. New men arrive who speak in newer accents of ambition. The theatre keeps winning. The economy creaks. The taxpayers grumble like distant thunder. She eats little. Sleep forgets her. She stands for hours, refusing bed, as if horizontal were a capitulation. In those final weeks of 1603, she sits on cushions on the floor, an empress negotiating with gravity. Courtiers beg her to rest. She glares. They ask for an heir. She gestures in a way that everyone later insists was clearly James. She dies at Richmond, and the country exhales into a Stuart morning with the slightly hungover feeling of a new regime. Let's rewind for a minute to enjoy the comic button we've been polishing, the national budget of virginity. Line item 1, deterrence. Rivals hesitate to invade a country whose queen might marry them tomorrow. Line item 2, unity. The unmarried body of the queen becomes the married body of the state. Protestant rhetoric meets Catholic pageantry in a secular compromise. Line item 3, branding. Virginal Gloriana sells like hot pies in a plague year. Poets write, portraits stack, courtiers devote. And the double entry accounting of it all. She spends nothing, she buys time. The return on investment is 45 years. Scandals, again, quickly, for the appetite of the midnight audience. Did she have a thing for hands? Possibly, gloves as gifts, fingers as theatre. Did courtiers fetishize her hair? Absolutely. It was a banner, a flame, a liturgy. Did the court indulge in masked balls that slid from allegory into foreplay? Scholars suggest yes, with a footnote, a cough, and a raised eyebrow. But the scandal that mattered after all the velvet burned down was policy. She kept her people from religious civil war by keeping doctrine at arm's length and ritual at eye level. She licensed a national identity that could be sincerely Anglican and privately complicated. She punished Catholics not for belief, but for conspiracy. It's a distinction better in law than in blood, but it stood. She punished Puritans for insisting that God needed help editing the prayer book. She disliked extremes, not because she was moderate, but because she was allergic to mess. If you reduce everything to one mechanism, you miss the texture that makes it true. So add back in the sounds. Civic bells after victory, the murmured Latin of a recusant mass in a hidden room, the hiss of rough starching, the clatter of a spinet, rain on palace windows, wax dripping, the low hum of a queen's fatigue. Add the tastes, spiced wine, salted fish, the metallic aftertaste of fear. Add the tactile, parchment under pen, velvet under fingers, a signet seal pushed into warm wax like a promise trying to become a fact. These senses were her reality. She held them all together with stubbornness and theatre. Jealousy and grudges. She practiced the royal sport of calibrated envy. She was jealous of the idea that any woman might claim a man without asking her permission, not because she wanted the man, but because she owned the principle. When a lady married, the queen demanded explanation, penance, and possibly the temporary forfeiture of joy. She grudged men who presumed to be indispensable. None were, except those who died and took their irreplaceability with them. She held grudges like heat holds in stone, slowly released at night, warming the chamber long after the fire burned out. Wars? The Armada, you know. The Irish campaigns you should remember. Brutal, mismanaged, costly. Essex bungled, others burned. The policy oscillated between plantation and extermination with the lazy cruelty of empire in beta. On the continent, she played at proxy war with Dutch rebels because cheaper is better and heroic minimalism photographs well. Her soldiers were often underpaid and half-shod. Her sailors romanticized in verse and cramped in reality. England's martial glory was always half logistics, half weather, and half poetry. Yes, that's three halves. Welcome to Tudor accounting. Crowning? The coronation ritual is the state's selfie, polished and filtered. Elizabeth's was a spectacle made to reset the national mood after a reign that smelled of smoke. Processions through London turned allegory into urban planning. Stages at corners, tableaus of virtues drawn from a Renaissance clip art folder. Children declaiming Latinate compliments. Fountains pouring wine because public health hadn't been invented. She touched for the king's evil scrofula healed by anointed hands because a queen's body doubles as pharmacy when hospitals don't. She swore to maintain the laws and the true religion. Which true religion? She politely reserved the right to define that later. Then the oil went on her head, and for a moment all the survival, scandal, and strategy looked like a sacrament. Let's perform one last mock seminar. Elizabethan policy as ritualized delay. Thesis. She waits until necessity chooses for her. Then she claims foresight. Evidence. Marriage. Never. Mary, Queen of Scots. Eventually succession. Last minute. Religious settlement early. Then never again. Ireland. Always too late. Culture. Why rush? Genius. Counter-argument. The Armada. Rebuttal. Weather. Concluding remark. Her delay wasn't indecision so much as slow cooking. Flavors deepen. Enemies overplay. Parliament tires itself out. Panic forgets its lines. The Queen's favourite spice. Time. And so the payoff. Our running gag ends with the final audit. The Virginity Fund closes its books in 1603. Dividends paid. A stable monarchy. A mostly unified church. A story that England will retell when it needs to feel brave in the rain. Assets remaining. Poets, theatres, maps, and a set of portraits so self-confident they read like policy memos. Liabilities. Ireland Ireland open case, future civil war unforeseen by optimists, inevitable to anyone who's met England. A Stuart who adored divine right like a new hat. The auditors nod. The numbers don't lie, though they do quote poetry. You want one sharp modern comparison to pocket on your way out. She lived like a startup founder who never shipped the product. She just kept raising, quarter after quarter, on promises and prototype demos, while the market stabilized around her. The product, of course, was marriage. The market was Europe. And the valuations? Astronomical, because she made not shipping look like genius, and genius like the most responsible thing a state could do. History says she died alone. The record suggests she died surrounded by symbols she authored, by a country that outgrew one faith and learned another, by men who loved the idea of her more than the woman, by women who watched her prove that power can be solitary and still be nation-sized. She turned life into a stage direction, then stuck the landing. And if you ask what she felt in the very last quiet after the last councillor stopped talking, the technical term might be this: mission accomplished-ish.